Chapter 8, the nervous system. The nervous system seamlessly connects the sensory perception of the internal and external environmental changes with our responses through our glandular and muscular tissue, and maintains our conscious awareness and unconscious control of homeostatic mechanisms. It does our thinking, learning, and keeps our memories. The model that we will use to describe the various aspects of the nervous system divides it along functional and structural lines. First of all, structurally, we have the central nervous system, which includes the brain and the spinal cord. And then we have the peripheral nervous system, which includes the nerves elsewhere in the body. Within the peripheral nervous system, we have the autonomic nervous system, which is controlling our processes such as heart rate, breathing, and emotions, circadian rhythms, etc. And we have the somatic, or the motor neurons, and we have the sensory neurons. The central nervous system integrates the incoming information from the sensory neurons, also called afferent neurons, and uses interneurons to coordinate the response. The interneurons then connect to motor neurons, which relay the information out of the central nervous system to the peripheral parts of the body where the effects or the responses take place. To help us clarify how these neurons function, we have, again, sensory afferent neurons, motor efferent neurons, and interneurons. I like to think of it in terms of an airport. We have the sensory information, or the afferent neurons, arriving at the terminals. Interneurons inside the terminals help to coordinate the flight plans. And then the efferent, or the exiting neurons, are the departure neurons, taking the signals out to the rest of the body. Now let's look at an individual neuron. These are the cells that make up the nervous system. And they're almost like a miniature nervous system in the sense that they have a sensory portion, or an incoming or receiving portion, which is made up of the dendrites and the cell body. Inside the cell body, we also have the integration center, where the cell decides whether the incoming signals are strong enough or important enough to transmit on. The axon, then, is the outgoing portion that transmits the signal away from the cell body to target cells. At the end of the axon, it divides into many little telodendria, or little projections, that then individually synapse or connect with other target cells. The nervous system is made up of more than just the neurons, so there are also cushioning, insulating, or supporting cells, which we call glia. So now we're going to be talking about the glial cells that protect and insulate the neurons within the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. In the central nervous system, we have 4 types of glial cells. Astrocytes surround the blood vessels in the brain, and they take nutrients from the blood and they transmit it to the neurons in a usable form, as well as protecting the neurons from any foreign material or unwanted substances that are in the bloodstream. We call this the blood-brain barrier, and that's created by these astrocytes. Next type is called microglial cells, and these are phagocytic, or they're basically the garbage collectors that help to prevent foreign material from entering the nervous system. The third type is called oligodendrocytes, and these produce what we call a myelin sheath around the axons, particularly of the central nervous system's neurons, and that helps to insulate them and protect them. The fourth type is called ependymal cells, and ependymal cells surround the ventricles, or the open spaces in the brain, and help to secrete fluid that protects and circulates this fluid that protects the brain and cushions it. So again, the 4 types of glial cells in the central nervous system are astrocytes, microglial cells, oligodendrocytes, and ependymal cells. Then in the peripheral nervous system, we have 2 additional types of glial cells. They are the Schwann cells, which create the myelin sheath on the nerve fibers, or the axons, in the peripheral nervous system. And then we have satellite cells, which create a myelin protecting covering on the cell bodies in the ganglion of the peripheral nervous system. So again, these glial cells function basically to insulate and protect the nerves, the nerve cells. They also have some interesting functions, especially in the central nervous system, with assisting in the learning and modulating the synaptic connections between the nerves. Axons travel together in bundles, Inside the central nervous system, we refer to these bundles of axons as tracts, and they're transmitting information from one part of the central nervous system to another. When these bundles of axons leave the central nervous system, we refer to them as nerves. Areas where we have lots of cell bodies we call gray matter, and areas where we have this groups of axons or transmitting regions we call white matter. And the gray matter, where the cell bodies are, is areas where processing is occurring. The cortex of the brain is composed of gray matter, and inside, deep inside the brain, we have areas called nuclei, where we have groups of cell bodies for processing information. In the spinal cord, the central part is composed of gray matter, and the outer part is composed of white matter or conducting axon tracts. The most common example, or the largest example, of these transmitting areas where we have lots of axons is called the corpus callosum, and it connects the left side of the brain with the right side of the brain with many, many axons. The nerves in the PNS have thousands of axons traveling together, and they're covered by fibrous connective tissues. We can see that here in this picture. The whole nerve is surrounded by what we call epineurium. Then fascicles or bundles of neurons within the greater nerve are called fascicles, and they are separated and surrounded by what we call perineurium. And then the individual axons have a covering around them called endoneurium. The simplest way to see how the nervous system works is called a reflex arc, and this only includes 2 or maybe 3 at the most neurons. Here we have a sensory neuron. In the example that we can see, it detects stretch in the muscle. When the doctor hits with a reflex hammer, there causes a quick stretch, and that is detected by that sensory neuron. The information goes to the spinal cord, and the sensory neuron synapses with a motor neuron that goes back and contracts the same muscle and prevents overstretching. It may also connect with some interneurons that would send signals to the central nervous system and other muscles as well. Here we'll look at a synapse, or the connection between 2 neurons. First in action, transmission comes down the presynaptic neuron. When it reaches the end or the terminal bulb of the axon, it opens sodium and calcium channels. The sodium and calcium then enter the cytoplasm of the axon, and that causes the vesicles carrying the neurotransmitter that you can see here in the picture to connect with the surface of the cell and release the neurotransmitters, in this case acetylcholine. Acetylcholine then crosses the space between the presynaptic and the postsynaptic membrane, which is called the synaptic cleft, and attaches to receptors for acetylcholine on the postsynaptic neuron. These receptors then cause the opening of sodium channels in the postsynaptic neuron's membrane, and the signal then starts to transmit along the surface of the postsynaptic neuron as well.